Welcome to the Faith and Business Podcast. I'm your host, Elle Edwards, mental health champion, positive psychology geek, and founder of the Faith and Business Playground. Join me each week as I talk openly about mental health, the dark side of entrepreneurism, and bring you Bible-friendly tools, support, and resources to help you heal from depression so you can actually be as happy as you think you should be. In today's episode of the podcast, I'm asking the question, what's the point of you? Now, I don't mean that rudely. It sounds a bit cheeky, doesn't it? It's also quite a big question, like, why am I here? Some of you have heard me talk about this before, how for the longest time, I actually came online and started an online business in 2011, I believe it was, 2010, 2011. But I first came online with Give a Brick as a charity that we founded with our church. And I fell into this world of everybody making money from home. And it was appealing to me. I had 3 young children at the time. I was a supply teacher. My husband and I would, when my eldest daughter, she's now 16, but when she was a baby, we used to literally stop in a car park halfway between home and where my husband was working and pass the baby. It wasn't that easy. It was quite hard going at the time. And so this idea of having the flexibility and the freedom to work from home was incredibly appealing. But part of that journey was, okay, well, what do I do? How can I help? What's my purpose? Why am I here? All those really big questions. And I went round and round in circles for a very long time. I took some business training, went through all the exercises, did all the things that you're meant to do. And I got to the point in 2012 where, do you know what? I am fed up of trying to find my thing. What if instead my thing is simply to be me and to then use all these skills that I've learned along the way to help other business owners? And that's how my VA business was born. As part of, I've always been a bit of a geek, and so, self-taught computers and all that sort of stuff. And so with Give a Brick, when we needed a website, I just learnt WordPress in a night. Nobody told me it should be difficult. It was only afterwards someone said, oh, that should have been quite tricky. How did you get on? This is in the old days of WordPress, I hasten to add. Back in 2010, where you had to, go through jumping through hoops, uploading, downloading, blah, blah, blah. And before that, our first website was an HTML website, which is even more painful. But I've had all these skills that I'd learned along the way. And so I decided in 2012, do you know what? I'm tired of the navel gazing. I'm just going to simply use these skills to help other people and just be myself. Little did I know then that I was actually stumbling upon what would become the basic premise of day-to-day happiness, this idea of you being you. And that ultimately is the conclusion to this episode. Well, that's not strictly true. That's the I guess that's one of the biggest takeaway from this episode. I hesitated then because I'm looking down at my notes and I'm like, oh no, Elle, you're an episode ahead of yourself. So your 2 episodes have merged into one, but c'est la vie. But no, ultimately, having gone around in circles and decided that I was bored of trying to find my thing and my thing was to be me, I didn't know at the time that actually that would become the foundation of a lot of the work that I do now. Because I do believe, and it says in the Bible that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Genesis, it says we're made in the image of God. I don't find it an accident or coincidental that we have red-bottom monkeys. I mean, they're hilarious. You try and tell me that God hasn't got a sense of humor, and I will prove you wrong every single time. Because the fact that we have a sense of humor and the fact that we can find daft stuff amusing. We're made in God's image, so therefore that gives me at least a glimmer of what God is like. But so what is the point of view? The point of view is for you to be you. And I would dare to suggest that if you are showing up every single day fully self-expressed, for want of a better expression, I actually don't like that expression. I prefer to say letting your little weirdo out to play. Which came about actually as a part of a conversation with one of the mums from school a couple of years ago. She had a T-shirt on. I can't remember what the T-shirt said, but it was a joke about grammar. And we both found it highly amusing. And it went over the heads of other people. But we had this conversation then about just being weird and letting your weirdo out to play. And until then, I didn't really have the language for what I really meant. And I love it when those sort of conversations happen. You have a conversation about one thing and then it leads to something else. It's brilliant. But ultimately, you showing up, letting your little weirdo out to play, being fully self-expressed if you're being you every single day, it almost doesn't matter where you do that. And by where, I mean like in terms of the work that you do. So yes, when I was doing the VA stuff, I was being myself and using those skills. I've moved away from that work now, and I'm doing the coaching and the writing and this work now around depression. But I'm still being myself. And I would dare to suggest that if you can show up being fully yourself, embracing all the things that make you you, it almost doesn't matter what work you do. And we, as Christians, we kind of tie ourselves up in knots, going, well, is it God's will? And none of us want to, we don't really want to live outside of the center of God's will. And we know, logically that yes, the best way to live is slap bang in the center of God's will. But then it becomes really hard to know, well, what is God's will in this specific situation? The conclusion I've come to is that God's will is for you to be you. And there are lots of Bible verses about this as well, other than the ones that I've kind of referenced without mentioning the reference. But what if, I'm going to pose this as a question, and we can talk about this. If you're in the playground, we can talk about this there. If you're not in the playground, come and join us. But what if ultimately God's will is for you to be you, quirks and foibles and eccentricities and all, fully self-expressed, so you can be full to the top with his love, so that you can be this delightful beacon of love in the world and share his love as a result more. What if that ultimately is God's will for your life, and that ultimately is God's will for my life? Because if that was the case, it takes the pressure off. Because it doesn't, in one sense, almost doesn't matter where we do that work. Like I've already said, if you're being you and being fully self-expressed in this position here, and then an opportunity happens, comes along over there, if you're still being you and you're still able to be that person, can't that be God's will too? I don't know. Like I don't have the ultimate answer on that one, but I think that it's a pretty good starting point, at least. My mum calls it nudging at doors. So that the other way to divine or get an inkling of God's will is to try stuff. If you have an idea or something pops in your head and it feels like, okay, then think, well, what's the next step? Take that next step. And if that opens up another opportunity, take the step after that and the step after that. But if you try something and the door stays shut, and then you try something else and that door stays shut, maybe that's God's way of saying, not right now. It is just a case sometimes of just moving forward, one foot in front of the other in faith. But if we can do that from a position of being ourselves, being fully self-expressed, being real about what's going on inside our heads as well, of course, just being honest, good days, bad days, in between days as well. That, I believe, is a really good giant step towards living in the center of God's will. It reminds me as well, like saying about like being honest about stuff as well. Like it's hard, I think, it can be hard in sort of Christian circles to admit when we're not having a really good day. But the reality is that when you share the messy parts of your journey, it helps other people. That's certainly been my experience. And I imagine if you reflect back on your life as well at different times, when you've talked about the trickier things or the messy parts, people are like, oh my gosh, yes, me too. And it helps people feel less alone. And that's a big part of my goal with the Faith and Business Playground, and why I'm encouraging us to have these conversations, is that it's lonely to feel like it's just you. If you feel like you're the only one, that nobody really gets what's going on inside your head, and you tie yourself up in knots because you feel guilty. I should be happy and I should be content and I should be this and then you feel guilty because you don't, and then compared to other people and, third world debt and all the horrific stuff that's happening in the world. I should be happy, but I'm really, really not. And if no one tells you that they feel like that too, it's incredibly lonely. And so that's the other part of this as well, is that the more you can be, I'm not asking you to talk about how you're feeling and then sit in those feelings forever. Sitting in that low point isn't healthy either. But to deny those feelings, to try and shove them away and pretend that they don't exist, that doesn't serve you and doesn't serve anybody else either. And so that's the other part of this. is to encourage you to start having those conversations. It reminds me and leads me on to, of course, the Sadness Slayer sessions. Because if you are somebody who is feeling in a not very good place right now, I just want to remind you that help is available, and you can get that help for free if you want to come and join the Faith and Business Playground, but we can also work through it one-on-one as well. And if you'd like to know more about what that might look like, the Sadness Slayer session, which is alliteration that's getting a little bit tricky to say, Sadness Slayer session. But if that does sound like something that would be of benefit to you, or somebody you can tell a friend, go to faithandbusinessplayground.com/talk. There's a page there with more information and a bit where you can pick a time that works for you, and we can have a conversation, because you're not alone. It isn't just you. We all have good days and bad days, good moments in bad days and bad moments in good days, and somewhere in between as well. And my real goal is to help people who are dealing with that, specifically undiagnosed depression. I suspect there are a lot of people out there who, if they were to describe how they were feeling, a clinician would say, yeah, that's depression. But you've never been to the doctor. That was my experience. I never once went to the doctor, and I've never been diagnosed with depression. It's only with the benefit of hindsight and having worked through it slowly on my own, slogging, that with hindsight, I suspect that I was struggling with depression. Not clinical depression. It wasn't diagnosed depression. I wasn't on medication. But just because you're not on medication, or just because you haven't been given a label from the doctor, doesn't mean that you're not okay. And it doesn't mean that, it doesn't change the fact that it's okay not to be okay. And it doesn't change the fact that you don't have to stay feeling like that forever. You can move forward and have more good days than bad days, and more good moments. If life is a pile of good things and bad things, it's that Doctor Who quote, isn't it, from the Da Vinci episode, where life is a pile of good things and bad things. If you've got more things in the good pile than the bad pile, then it's ultimately a good day. It's that sort of stuff, isn't it? But anyway, rabbiting on enough now. If that is something that, if you're listening to these words and you're like, and you can feel that inside you, I think we should talk. So go to faithandbusinessplayground.com/talk. In the meantime, of course, as ever, thank you for being here. It's my pleasure to share this with you. And if you're not subscribed, of course, subscribe. Next episode, we are going to be digging into some of those upgrades. So if you listened to the episode, let's have a look, what episode was it? Episode 111, I introduced this idea of upgrades, upgrading your skills, upgrading your environment, upgrading your thinking. Next episode, episode 114, which is Friday's episode, we're going to be digging into the first part of that. So if you listened to the previous one and you were interested in that, be sure to check out Friday's episode. But like I say, in the meantime, thank you for being here. I shall catch up with you then. Take care. Bye-bye.